Okay, let's unpack this. We're dedicating this deep dive to a conflict that, well, it fundamentally rearranged the global order. It ended 4 ancient empires, launched the United States into its modern identity. And yet, for so many Americans, this war remains startlingly vague. We're talking about World War I.
That's right. And our mission today is really to cut through that historical haze, isn't it? To understand the full scope of the United States involvement. And we're pulling directly from our sources here, including, some extensive research from the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission.
Yeah, and we have to tackle that core question right up front, the one that runs through the material. Why does WWI hold such a faint imprint on the American consciousness?
It's a really unavoidable question, and the contrast, well, it's stark, isn't it? As our sources point out, we have this clear, almost mythological understanding of the Civil War.
Because the battlefields are here, right? Visible, central to our story.
Exactly. And then World War II. That war, it sort of possessed a moral clarity, the defeat of fascism, and it ended in this national triumph. Plus, we've had that generation of veterans among us until very recently, immortalized in films, books, everywhere.
WWI just lacks that immediacy. It feels distant in time, geography, fought overseas. And crucially, U.S. forces only fought for a really brief period.
Right. April 6, 1917 to November 11th, 1918. Not even 19 months.
That's a very short window.
It is. And that short intervention period, it definitely contributed to this ambivalence surrounding the conflict. Americans were never fully sold on the necessity of entering in the first place. And then the peace settlement afterwards, Versailles, was widely seen as a failure, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Leading to that sense of disillusionment, that retreat back into isolationism.
Yeah, it just didn't wrap up with that clear, triumphant national narrative like World War II did.
But that brevity, it's so misleading when you look at the human cost. Because in that short window, Americans fought with, the same tenacity we saw later, and they died at a rate. I mean, only the Civil War surpassed it.
It's staggering.
We're talking about a hidden cost of over 116,000 military deaths and another 200,000 wounded.
That is a massive human toll for a conflict that lasted less than 19 months for the U.S.
It really speaks to the speed, the intensity of modern warfare by that point.
It does. And, on that note of remembrance, it's really worth emphasizing something from the material. For decades, WWI was the only major 20th century war without its own dedicated, completed national monument in Washington, D.C. to honor those who served.
That's incredible when you think about it.
It is. So the recent effort to establish the National World War I Memorial Project, that's a really crucial step, making sure this essential chapter isn't forgotten anymore.
Right, ensuring it gets its proper place in our memory.
What's fascinating here is to understand why America jumped in 1917, we really need to step back. We need to look at that European powder keg that just exploded in the summer of 1914.
Yeah, and that powder keg, it didn't just appear overnight, did it? The components, they'd been forged over the whole prior century.
Exactly. You had these huge changes in the 19th century. Things like advances in medicine, better food cultivation. Europe's population tripled.
Tripled? Wow.
Which meant this vast pool of manpower, available for conscription. It fueled these immense standing armies.
And that population growth, it was sort of weaponized, wasn't it, by the rise of this fierce nationalism?
Fierce is the right word. Leaders used mandatory conscription, national schooling, basically indoctrinating millions, creating patriots who genuinely believed their nation's honor depended on winning wars.
So you have this intense domestic pressure,
combined with aggressive international competition, scrambling for overseas colonies. Every powerful nation was deeply suspicious of its neighbors.
And all that tension was managed, or maybe mismanaged, through these rigid alliance systems. Systems that pretty much guaranteed any small spark would ignite a massive continental fire.
Yeah, let's map those out quickly. On one side, you had the Central Powers, that's Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Long-term partners, mutual defense pacts.
Right. Now, initially, Italy was aligned with them in the Triple Alliance. But Italy was deeply frustrated by Austro-Hungarian rule over ethnic Italians up north.
So a crack in that coalition.
The major crack, which allowed them to eventually switch sides. And later, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, and Bulgaria joined the Central Powers.
Okay, so that's one side.
Then on the other side, you have the Allies, also called the Triple Entente. That's France, Great Britain, and Russia.
And Russia, huge but slow to mobilize, saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples.
Precisely, which is why it backed Serbia against Austria-Hungary. And Britain, with its massive navy, was crucially committed to defending the neutrality of Belgium.
Which turns out to be key.
Absolutely critical.
And the ignition point, the spark itself. Sarajevo, June 28, 1914.
Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist, shoots Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian throne.
And this wasn't just some isolated act of violence, was it?
Not at all. It was the spark landing on this incredibly complex web of preset military mobilization plans. Hair triggers, really.
And the most dangerous of those plans belonged to Germany. The Schlieffen Plan.
Yes, German military thinking assumed they'd have to fight France and Russia at the same time. It seemed inevitable to them.
Okay.
And since Russia was huge but needed maybe 6 weeks to get its whole army and railway system going.
Slow giant.
Right. The plan demanded a rapid, overwhelming knockout blow against France first, sweep through Belgium, bypass the French defenses.
Invading France by going through neutral Belgium. That's the key part.
It is. And what made the plan so rigid, so terrifying, was its dependence on railway timetables, logistics. Once that mobilization schedule was triggered, political leaders basically couldn't stop it. The trains carrying millions of troops and supplies had to keep rolling. No turning back.
So when Germany invaded Belgium on August 4th,
That immediately pulled Britain into the war, honoring their commitment to defend Belgian neutrality, and boom, the whole alliance system just collapsed into continental war in a matter of weeks.
the opening battles,
Yeah.
catastrophic right from the start.
Immediately. The French, pushing into territory they'd lost earlier, suffered tens of thousands of casualties.
I read one figure, 27,000 French soldiers killed on August 22, 1914, one single day.
One day. It's almost impossible to comprehend that scale of loss. More casualties than the U.S. suffered in the entire Vietnam War in one day for one nation.
And the German advance, it eventually gets stopped.
Yes, just outside Paris, at the First Battle of the Marne. But then, as both sides tried to outflank each other, the so-called race to the sea, they essentially just dug in wherever they stopped.
Creating that static line.
Exactly. By late 1914, you have this continuous, pretty much unchanged line running 450 miles from the Belgian coast down to Switzerland.
The Western Front stalemate.
It had set in.
Yeah.
And in less than 5 months, the combined casualties, already nearly 2 million.
2 million, just like that.
Yeah.
Here's where we really need to dive into the brutal reality of those trenches. Because the life and death endured by the soldiers for the next 3 years, it's central to understanding the horror of this conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Men separated by no man's land, sometimes just a few hundred yards wide. And their existence was this bizarre mix of months of crushing boredom, punctuated by moments of just sheer terror.
The conditions.
Yeah.
They almost defy belief, don't they?
They really do. Life was just characterized by filth, disease, the stench. The trenches were infested with these giant, well-fed rats and hungry lice spreading infection. Men stood for days, sometimes weeks, in pools of standing water and mud.
Trench foot.
Trench foot, a painful, debilitating infection, often led to amputation. And the air. It was a constant mix of unwashed bodies, smoke, lingering poison gas, and maybe worst of all, that sweet, cloying smell of decaying corpses.
Just unimaginable. And their daily routine.
It was this exercise in contradiction. You'd hide below ground during the day, maybe cleaning equipment, writing letters home, knowing any movement might attract a sniper.
Constant danger.
Always. But then nightfall was the time for movement. Patrolling no man's land, repairing the endless tangles of barbed wire, bringing up crucial supplies under the cover of darkness.
And always the threat of artillery, right? That random, indiscriminate death.
That was the constant psychological strain. Massive artillery bombardments could blast men into tiny fragments or bury them alive in their dugouts. It broke thousands of men mentally.
And this leads right to that core insight about the futility of it all.
Yeah.
Technology had advanced, but the commanders, they were stuck in the past.
Exactly. Technology compounded the slaughter because commanders clung to these outdated concepts. Honor, frontal assault, the spirit of the infantry.
While the defenders had these horrific new weapons.
Right. Artillery, for one. Powered by improved steelmaking, it became the biggest killer on the battlefield.
Massive guns, launching huge explosive shells with, what, better accuracy.
Unprecedented accuracy, yeah. Thanks to new methods of aiming, coordinating fire, our sources are clear. The overwhelming majority of casualties in WWI, not bullets, shrapnel from artillery shells.
Okay, artillery the biggest killer. Then there's the machine gun.
The machine gun, the ultimate defensive weapon of the time, firing hundreds of bullets per minute, capable of wiping out entire waves of attackers in just seconds.
And yet, generals kept ordering massed frontal attacks directly into them.
They did, convinced that aggressive human spirit, that sheer willpower, would somehow prevail over the technology. It's perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Western Front, that disconnect.
And then poison gas.
Maybe the most hideous weapon of the war. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas.
What does it do?
It blistered the skin, the eyes, the lungs, led to agonizing deaths. Or, for the survivors, these lingering, debilitating effects for the rest of their lives.
Even with gas masks.
Well, protective masks eventually reduced the immediate death toll, sure, but the psychological terror of seeing that greenish-yellow cloud drifting towards you, that remained indelible.
And tanks, they came later.
Tanks were the one major technological answer the British developed. Primitive at first, though.
How so?
They were unreliable, really slow, often broke down or just got stuck in the mud. But their appearance definitely signaled the future of warfare, a mechanized way to break that entrenched defense. And they did get significantly better towards the end.
The futility, though, really comes into focus in 1916, doesn't it? With Verdun and the Somme.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
1916 was the peak of the grinding attrition. Germany launched its offensive at Verdun, and they intentionally planned it as a battle of attrition. They literally stated they wanted to bleed the French army white.
Just wear them down through sheer casualties.
Exactly. For 10 months, they threw everything they had at this narrow front. By the time it was over, they'd gained maybe 3 miles of territory.
3 miles.
3 miles. And both sides had suffered nearly identical casualties, around 740,000 combined. Just horrific, pointless slaughter.
But the Somme, somehow even worse.
Even more catastrophic in many ways.
Yeah.
The British aimed to relieve the pressure on the French at Verdun. They sent their new volunteer armies, the Kitchener armies, over the top on July 1st, 1916.
After a massive artillery bombardment, right? They thought it would destroy the German defenses.
Days of bombardment.
Yeah.
But the German barbed wire, their deep dugouts, they remained largely intact. The result, on that first day alone, 57,000 British casualties.
57,000.
In one day.
Including nearly 20,000 deaths. Just to put that in perspective for you, that single day saw more British dead than the U.S. suffered in the entirety of the Korean War.
That's staggering.
And the battle just dragged on. After 4.5 months, the Allies had advanced a mere 6 miles.
6 miles, at what cost? Over 600,000 Allied casualties. It led one German officer to write that chilling line. Some. The whole history of the world cannot contain a more ghastly word.
Yeah. And when Americans looked overseas and saw that, you can understand why they were pretty satisfied with President Wilson saying, we're staying out of this.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, it's really crucial to recognize that America's neutrality, well, was complicated. Because this conflict was truly global. This wasn't just Europe fighting.
Right. It spread way beyond.
When the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers late in 1914, the war just exploded into the Middle East. You had fighting over crucial oil fields.
Gallipoli.
The disastrous Gallipoli campaign, yeah.
Yes.
Where Allied forces tried and failed to seize Constantinople. And then you had the famous Arab tribes rising up against Turkish rule.
Assisted by T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia.
The very same resourceful British officer. And the scope expanded even further. French North African colonies sent over 600,000 men to fight on the Western Front.
Wow. 600,000.
Britain seized German colonies across Africa. Even India, the jewel of the British Empire, sent 1.3 million soldiers.
1.3 million from India. Where did they fight?
Across Europe, Africa, the Middle East. Many, including figures like Mohandas Gandhi, actually encouraged support, hoping that wartime service would earn Indians greater status and rights back home, a gamble that didn't really pay off immediately.
And Japan?
Japan was aligned with Britain. They seized German territories in China and across the Pacific. So yeah, this was a true world war, long before America ever got involved.
Okay, so while all this is happening globally, from 1914 to 1916, President Wilson is holding firm on U.S. neutrality.
He was insistent. The nation should be impartial in thought as well as in action. That was his phrase. The U.S. was focused inward, dealing with massive domestic changes.
Like the shift from a rural to an urban society.
Exactly. And they wanted to avoid getting tangled up in these traditional, bloody European quarrels.
But public opinion wasn't really impartial, was it?
No, not really. Because of shared language, heritage, democratic ideals, opinion naturally tilted towards the Allies, towards Britain and France.
And German actions didn't help their case.
Not at all. Things like the invasion of neutral Belgium, burning the medieval library at Louvain, executing civilians, shooting the British nurse Edith Cavell, Allied propaganda, even when exaggerated, capitalized on these verified acts of brutality. It really helped cast Germany as the aggressor, the Hun.
And the war at sea created the biggest headache for neutrality, right? The contradiction.
Absolutely. Britain's navy imposed this incredibly effective blockade. It pretty much prevented the Central Powers from trading overseas.
Which devastated the German civilian economy.
Devastated it. Led to the starvation of, estimates say, over 600,000 Germans by the end of the war. But that same blockade allowed the Allies to buy enormous amounts of U.S. goods, food, supplies.
Financed by huge loans from American banks.
Right, which created this massive vested commercial interest in an Allied victory here in the States. American prosperity became increasingly tied to the Allied war effort.
And Germany's response to the blockade. The U-boats.
Politically ruinous for them, they launched unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning their U-boats would sink any merchant ship heading to Allied ports without warning.
Including passenger liners. Which brings us to the Lusitania.
May 1915. The sinking of the British liner Lusitania. 1,198 people died, including 128 Americans. U.S. outrage just exploded.
But Wilson didn't declare war then.
No, he negotiated. He got Germany to temporarily halt unrestricted attacks on passenger ships. But U.S. opinion was permanently shifted. The tragedy fueled a powerful preparedness movement back home, people arguing the U.S. had to build up its military just in case.
Even though Wilson won re-election in 1916, campaigning on Carolina win, he kept us out of war.
He did. It was a very fine line he was walking.
And despite the official neutrality, Americans were involved on the ground, weren't they, in relief efforts?
Highly active. Herbert Hoover, yes, the future president, led the Commission for the Relief of Belgium, the CRB. It was an all-volunteer effort, privately funded initially, and it became the gold standard for modern international humanitarian aid.
How did Hoover manage that?
He was an incredible organizer, a mining engineer by background. The CRB raised millions, navigated the complex bureaucracies of both the Allies and the Germans, and successfully fed 9.3 million Belgian and northern French civilians caught behind German lines. Set up massive logistical networks, kept them alive from 1914 until well after the war. It was an amazing feat.
And young Americans were actually fighting too, as volunteers.
Oh, yes. Some men joined the French Foreign Legion, like the poet Alan Seeger, who died in combat. Others volunteered as ambulance drivers. Organizations like the American Field Service were full of them.
Ernest Hemingway drove an ambulance, didn't he? In Italy.
He did, for the Red Cross. Got wounded, too. And then in the air, you had American volunteers flying for France in the famous Lafayette Escadrille.
Including Eugene Bullard.
Eugene Bullard, the first black fighter pilot. Highly decorated by the French. Faced terrible racism back home, but a hero in France. All these volunteers were very visible signs of American sentiment, even while the nation was officially neutral.
Okay, so despite all the humanitarian work, the volunteers, the shifting public opinion, Wilson holds off until 1917. What finally tipped the scale? What were those critical final catalysts that pushed the U.S. into the war? Let's unpack that dramatic shift.
Well, the number one factor was Germany's desperate gamble. Facing severe shortages because of that British blockade, they made a fateful decision. On February 1st, 1917, they resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, total U-boat war.
Knowing it would probably bring the U.S. in.
They knew it was highly likely, yes. But their calculation was purely strategic, almost mathematical. They gambled they could sink enough supply ships heading to Britain and France to force an Allied collapse maybe in 3 months, 6 months max, before the U.S. could mobilize, train, and transport an effective fighting force to Europe.
Wow. A race against time.
A huge gamble. The U.S. immediately broke off diplomatic relations, but the real explosion of outrage came a couple of weeks later, mid-February, the Zimmermann telegrams.
Ah, yes, the telegram. The British intercepted this?
They intercepted and decoded this secret message from Germany's foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to the German ambassador in Mexico.
And what did it say?
It offered Mexico a deal. If the U.S. entered the war against Germany and Mexico joined Germany as an ally, Germany would help Mexico recapture territory it had lost in the Mexican-American War.
We're talking Texas, New Mexico, Arizona.
Exactly. When the British shared this with the U.S. and it was published on March 1st, it brought the distant European war right to America's doorstep.
Even though Mexico turned the offer down flat.
Mexico refused, yes. But the damage was done. The public outcry in the U.S. was deafening. It seemed to confirm Germany's hostile intentions directly against the U.S. homeland.
Okay, so U-boats resume, Zimmermann telegram. Anything else?
A third key factor provided the sort of moral justification Wilson needed. In March 1917, the Tsar's deeply unpopular regime in Russia collapsed, swept aside by the February Revolution.
So Russia was moving towards democracy, or at least away from autocracy.
Exactly. Suddenly, Wilson could frame the war much more easily. It wasn't just messy European power politics anymore. Now, he could portray it purely as a conflict between the democracies, the Allies, and the autocratic empires, the Central Powers.
And then the U-boats sank more American ships.
5 American merchant ships sunk in rapid succession in March. That was the final straw. Wilson had his justification.
He goes to Congress, April 2nd, 1917.
Asking for a declaration of war. His famous line, "The world must be made safe for democracy."
And Congress agrees.
Overwhelmingly. Though it's a vital historical note. Jeannette Rankin, the very first woman elected to national office in the U.S., was one of only 50 members in the House who voted against it.
Sticking to pacifist principles.
Firmly. She would later be the only member of Congress to vote against U.S. entry into World War II as well. A remarkable stance.
So the U.S. declares war, and it arrives just in time for the Allies, didn't it? They were in bad shape.
Desperately timely. Russia was effectively out of the war following the Bolshevik Revolution later that year. Worse, the French army, after yet another disastrous offensive in April 1917, experienced widespread mutinies.
Mutinies? You mean soldiers refusing to fight?
Large numbers of units refused to launch any more attacks. They'd defend, but they wouldn't go over the top again. Morale had collapsed. The Allies were basically reduced to a grim strategy. Just hold on until the Americans were ready.
But the U.S. wasn't ready, was it? The army was tiny.
Profoundly unprepared for war on this scale. The combined regular army, National Guard, Marine Corps, barely 300,000 men. Europe had armies in the millions.
So how did they build an army?
Volunteer recruitment wasn't enough. Congress quickly passed the Selective Service Act, the draft.
A draft? That must have been controversial.
It was a massive undertaking. All men aged 21 to 31 had to register. It eventually raised a force of over 2.7 million soldiers through conscription. They used a lottery system to try and make it fair.
And you mentioned Alvin York earlier, the famous hero.
Right. Alvin York initially registered as a conscientious objector based on his religious beliefs. He was drafted anyway, wrestled with his conscience, but eventually decided to serve. The draft essentially built a modern mass army from scratch very quickly.
And training them.
The military launched this intensive training program. The average draftee got about 6 months of training. Rigorous physical fitness, drilling, learning how to operate as part of a large unit. But critically, our sources highlight something else. The military acted as this huge engine for assimilation.
How so? Because the army was so diverse?
Hugely diverse. Remember, nearly 40% of the soldiers were immigrants or the sons of immigrants. Many didn't even speak English fluently.
So the army taught them English.
Actively worked to integrate them. Often organized foreign recruits into units based on language, led by multilingual officers. Provided intensive classes in English, U.S. history, civics. These training camps became like citizen factories.
Fostering a shared identity.
Exactly. Fostering a sense of shared purpose, shared American identity. It really accelerated the acceptance of these new Americans into the mainstream, especially as they fought and died alongside native-born comrades later on.
While the army's training, the Navy has to get them there. And the U-boats were still a massive threat.
A huge threat. In early 1917, Germany was sinking maybe 1 out of every 4 ships departing British ports. They were betting they could cripple the Allied supply lines before the American Expeditionary Force, the AEF, could deploy in strength.
So what did the U.S. Navy do?
Immediately sprang into action, ramped up production of destroyers and slightly faster submarine chasers.
And changed tactics.
So the crucial strategic change was implementing the convoy system, grouping merchant ships together, protecting them with naval escorts, destroyers circling around them.
Did it work?
Dramatically. U-boat sinkings dropped almost immediately. It was a massive success. It ensured safe passage for 2 million U.S. troops across the Atlantic. Only 637 American soldiers were lost to German submarines on the troop transports.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Without that naval success, the AEF never even gets to Europe in force.
Exactly. The Navy's role was absolutely fundamental.
This raises an important question then. If the military is mobilizing, how did the government mobilize the entire society? The economy, the people?
Yeah.
This seems like a huge shift for the U.S.
It was unprecedented. The government took this highly active role in managing the economy. It marked a decisive shift away from the old laissez-faire, completely free market approach.
How did they manage industry?
The War Industries Board, the WIB, led by this brilliant financier, Bernard Baruch. The WIB was given extraordinary power to coordinate wartime production. They allocated raw materials, set production standards, organized transportation, basically told industries what to make, how much, and where to send it.
Wow. Centralized control.
Revolutionary for the time. And to keep the factories running smoothly, they needed labor cooperation. There had been a lot of strikes and unrest before the war.
So they made deals with the unions.
They established the National War Labor Board, the NWLB. It mediated disputes, set higher wages, mandated the 8-hour day in many war industries, and critically recognized the right of workers to unionize.
Those are huge gains for labor.
Massive victories. And they set precedents that were later cemented during the New Deal in the 30s. It showed the government could intervene on behalf of workers.
Okay, so industry and labor are mobilized. How did they pay for all this? Wars are expensive.
Incredibly expensive. They did raise income taxes. The 16th Amendment allowing a federal income tax was pretty new, but most of the cost, the vast majority, was funded by selling Liberty bonds to the public.
Like war bonds in WWII.
Exactly the same idea. They were promoted with these huge, glamorous nationwide campaigns, used Hollywood movie stars like Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford at massive public rallies,
Getting everyone involved.
fostering this sense of collective participation, patriotic duty. Ultimately, the Liberty Bond drives raised over $20 billion for the war effort, an enormous sum back then.
And conservation. Was that a big push too?
Another major effort, yes. Led again by Herbert Hoover, running the Food Administration this time, building on his success with the Belgian relief.
But this wasn't rationing. Right. Not mandatory.
No. Hoover promoted voluntary measures, things like meatless Mondays, wheatless Wednesdays, encouraged Americans to plant vegetable gardens, victory gardens.
Did people go for it?
They did. These voluntary efforts were remarkably successful. They helped reduce overall U.S. food consumption by about 15%, which allowed the U.S. to double the amount of food shipped to the desperate allies in Europe.
And this is where we get Liberty Cabbage.
Ah, yes, that was part of the flip side. This intense anti-German hysteria swept the country. Common items with German names were rebranded out of patriotic fervor or maybe fear. Sauerkraut became Liberty Cabbage. German measles became Liberty Measles. Hamburgers became Liberty Steak for a while.
Wow. That seems extreme.
It was. And tragically, that anti-German sentiment was amplified, even sanctioned by new laws. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918.
What did they do?
They were ostensibly aimed at curbing spying or treasonous behavior, but they severely restricted free speech, gave the government broad powers to prosecute dissent, criticism of the war effort, or anything deemed disloyal.
So people could be jailed for speaking out against the war.
Absolutely. Thousands were prosecuted, including prominent socialists like Eugene Debs, and it fueled this climate of intolerance, harassment, sometimes outright violence against German Americans. Many felt forced to change their names, stop speaking German in public, abandon their cultural heritage just out of fear. It's a darker side of the home front mobilization.
Okay, let's turn back to the soldiers themselves. The doughboys, as they were called.
Yeah.
You mentioned the diversity. What did the average soldier look like?
Our sources paint a really interesting picture. The average doughboy was only about 5 feet 7.5 inches tall, a bit shorter than today.
Okay.
A shocking number, nearly 37%, were classified as unable to read or write adequately, which really underscores why those Army literacy and civics programs we talked about were so vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
7 out of 10 were draftees, not volunteers. And as we said, nearly 40% were immigrants or the sons of immigrants, a truly diverse force pulled from all corners of American society.
And while you said the immigrant soldiers found the Army helped them assimilate, earn them respect, the experience was very different for African Americans, wasn't it?
Fundamentally different. Over 350,000 African Americans served, a huge number, but they served in rigidly segregated units and faced systemic racism at every turn, both from commanders and often from fellow white soldiers.
Were they allowed in combat roles?
Unfortunately, due to deep-seated prejudice and fears among white commanders about arming and training black men, most African-American soldiers were relegated to menial labor duties, unloading ships, digging ditches, building roads, burying the dead. Essential work, but kept far from the front lines.
But some did see combat. You mentioned Pershing loaning units to the French.
Exactly. General Pershing, while adamant about keeping the main AEF independent, did agree to loan several African-American infantry regiments to the French army.
Another French command.
They experienced significantly less racism. The French military was more accustomed to colonial troops and judged them more on performance. And these American units fought with immense courage and skill when given the chance.
Like the Harlem Hellfighters.
The most famous example, yes, the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters. They spent more consecutive time in combat, 191 days in the frontline trenches, than any other American unit, white or black. Suffered heavy casualties, earned numerous decorations for bravery from the French, including the Croix de Guerre for the entire regiment.
And they brought jazz to Europe.
Their regimental band, led by James Reese Europe, was sensational. They famously introduced jazz music to European audiences, creating this vital cultural legacy alongside their incredible combat record. Their service and that of other black units provided irrefutable proof of loyalty, patriotism, and capability, which became crucial fuel for the post-war fight for civil rights back home.
And we absolutely cannot overlook the profound social change driven by women's participation in the war effort.
Absolutely not. WWI marked the first time women formally served in the U.S. military, not just as civilian support like nurses often were before.
How many served as nurses?
Over 20,000 Army and Navy nurses served, many very close to the front lines in field hospitals and casualty clearing stations. It was dangerous work. Tragically, over 200 died in service, many falling victim to that devastating 1918-19 influenza pandemic that swept through the camps and hospitals.
And there are other roles, too, the Hello Girls.
Yes. Over 400 women served as bilingual telephone operators with the Army Signal Corps in France. They were known as the Hello Girls.
Bilingual, English and French.
Exactly. They provided the absolutely vital communication links connecting Allied headquarters, supply depots, frontline units across the vast logistical network. Fluent French was essential. General Pershing himself said they were indispensable.
But they weren't considered soldiers.
No, technically they were hired as civilian contractors, even though they wore uniforms, served under military discipline, and worked in dangerous areas. It was a bureaucratic loophole. They were denied veteran status and benefits for decades. It took until the 1970s, 60 years later, for the surviving Hello Girls to finally receive official recognition as veterans.
That's unbelievable. And in the Navy.
The Navy took a different approach. They needed clerks, typists, mechanics, translators to free up men for sea duty. The Naval Reserve Act didn't specify gender, so the Navy enlisted over 11,000 women directly into the Naval Reserve. They were known as yeomanettes, or yeoman-F.
So they were officially military personnel.
Yes, with the same rank, pay, and responsibilities as male yeomen. It was a groundbreaking move.
And all this service nurses, Hello Girls, yeomanettes, it had a political impact.
A critical impact. Their contributions, alongside women taking over factory jobs and farm work back home, provided undeniable momentum for the women's suffrage movement. It became much harder to argue women weren't capable citizens worthy of the vote.
Did President Wilson change his mind? He'd been opposed to suffrage.
He publicly reversed his position. He stated that granting women the right to vote was now a wartime necessity, a recognition of their service and importance to the nation's victory. This service was absolutely instrumental in pushing the 19th Amendment through Congress and getting it ratified in 1920, finally granting American women the right to vote nationwide.
Okay, so the home front is mobilized, the diverse army is trained and arriving. Here's where the story of the AEF finally converges with that brutal European war machine on the battlefield itself.
Right. And the commander of the AEF, General John Blackjack Pershing, had a very clear vision. He absolutely refused repeated, often desperate Allied demands to just feed American soldiers into British and French units as replacements for their horrific losses.
He wanted an independent American army.
Insistent on it. He wanted to build the AEF as a distinct, independent fighting force, trained in traditional American methods emphasizing marksmanship, rifle skills, and what they called open warfare, or maneuver warfare. The idea was to get the Germans out of the trenches, break the stalemate, not just sit in defensive lines like the French and British had been forced to do for years.
So a different philosophy of fighting.
A different philosophy and a deep belief in the fighting quality of the American soldier if properly trained and led as a unified force.
When did the AEF first see action?
Initial arrivals were slow through the summer and fall of 1917, mostly for training and acclimatization. But Americans quickly began making their presence felt in smaller ways. The first recorded U.S. soldier to fire a shot in anger was reportedly a Sergeant Robert Brawlett, firing French artillery in October 1917.
And the first combat deaths
Came just days later, early November 1917. 3 soldiers, James Gresham, Thomas Enright, and Merle Hay, were killed during a German night trench raid on their position. a grim first taste of the realities of the Western Front.
But the real test, the big one, came in the spring of 1918, didn't it? With the German spring offensives?
Exactly. Russia was out of the war, freeing up nearly 50 experienced German divisions from the Eastern Front. Germany knew this was their last chance. They launched a series of massive offensives starting in March 1918, using new tactics.
What kind of new tactics?
Relying on speed, surprise, and specially trained shock troops, the stormtroopers. Bypassing strong points, infiltrating deep into Allied lines, disrupting communications, designed to finally break the stalemate before the full weight of American manpower could arrive. And initially, it worked frighteningly well. They made huge gains.
So the AEF was rushed in to plug the gaps.
Yes, American divisions, some still relatively inexperienced, were rushed into action alongside weary British and French units to help halt these German advances. One of the first significant independent actions was at Cantigny in May. U.S. troops attacked and successfully seized the village, holding it against fierce German counterattacks. A small battle, but a big morale booster.
And then Below Wood, that's one of the most famous Marine Corps battles.
Below Wood in June 1918. The U.S. Marines, part of the Army's 2nd Division, were thrown in to stop a crucial German advance that was getting dangerously close to Paris.
What was the fighting like?
Absolutely brutal. 3 grueling weeks of intense, close-quarters combat to clear the dense, boulder-strewn woods of entrenched German machine gun nests. Very high casualties on both sides. The Marines attacked relentlessly.
And this is where they supposedly got the nickname Devil Dogs.
That's the legend. From appreciative German soldiers, supposedly awed by their ferocity. Whether it's true or not, the nickname stuck. The battle was incredibly costly, but it played a major role in stopping that German drive on Paris.
And Chateau-Thierry.
Near Belleau Wood, French and American forces, including the U.S. 3rd Division, who earned their nickname Rock of the Marne, they rallied together to throw back the final German assault of the spring offensives, the so-called Peace Offensive, in July.
So by summer 1918, the German momentum is broken.
Utterly exhausted, they'd shot their bolt, suffered irreplaceable losses, especially among those elite stormtroopers, and Allied confidence was surging, knowing that hundreds of thousands of fresh American troops were now pouring into France every month. The tide had turned.
Which leads to the final Allied push, the 100 Days Offensive.
Exactly. Starting in August 1918. And the now fully formed 1st U.S. Army, officially created in July under Pershing's direct command, was ready for major offensive operations.
Their first big independent show was Saint-Mihiel.
The Saint-Mihiel salient, September 12th. This was a bulge in the German lines that had existed since 1914. Pershing planned a massive pincer movement involving over 500,000 American troops and significant French support, plus tanks and aircraft.
How did it go?
Remarkably well. Thanks to careful planning, overwhelming force, and the element of surprise, the assault achieved its objectives very quickly, collapsing the salient in about 2 days, capturing thousands of prisoners, and disrupting a planned German withdrawal from the area. A huge success and morale boost for the AEF.
But the biggest, toughest battle for the Americans was still to come.
The Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Beginning September 26th and lasting right up until the armistice in November. This was the largest battle in American history up to that point.
How many troops involved?
A staggering 1.2 million American troops participated over the 6 weeks of the offensive. The goal was to break through the Germans' main defensive line, the Hindenburg Line, in this very difficult terrain between the Meuse River and the Argonne Forest, and cut their main railway supply line.
Difficult terrain, you said.
Heavily forested, hilly, muddy, and incredibly well defended by the Germans, with multiple lines of trenches, concrete bunkers, machine gun nests hidden everywhere.
How did the offensive start?
With an enormous 3-hour artillery barrage. Our sources note that this opening barrage used more artillery ammunition than the Union and Confederate armies fired combined during the entire 4 years of the American Civil War.
Wow. The scale is just mind-boggling.
Absolutely. But despite the bombardment, the initial American assault stalled. Logistical problems getting supplies forward, the sheer density of the defenses, deep mud, and frankly, the inexperience of many American divisions led to very heavy casualties and slow progress at first.
But they kept pushing.
Relentlessly. Over the next few weeks, through brutal fighting, the more experienced American troops, learning hard lessons, gradually cleared the Argonne Forest, broke through the Hindenburg Line, and advanced. By October 31st, they had essentially cleared the area, forcing the Germans into a full retreat. It was the decisive American contribution to breaking the German army on the Western Front.
And this period, Saint-Mihiel, Meuse-Argonne, It produced some legendary war heroes.
It certainly did. Became symbols for the nation back home. Sergeant Alvin York, we mentioned him before, the conscientious objector turned hero.
What did he do exactly?
During the Meuse-Argonne, on October 8, 1918, his patrol came under heavy machine gun fire. York, an expert marksman from the Tennessee mountains, reportedly used his rifle and pistol with incredible skill to single-handedly silence multiple German machine guns and, with a few other soldiers, ended up capturing 132 German prisoners. An amazing feat. He was awarded the Medal of Honor.
Incredible. And there were animal heroes, too.
Yes, still remember today. Sergeant Stubby, the little dog, part bull terrier mix,
Smuggled to France.
smuggled to France by his owner, became the mascot of the 102nd Infantry Regiment, took part in 17 battles, supposedly warned his unit of incoming gas attacks, located wounded soldiers on the battlefield, even captured an enemy spy by grabbing his pants. He was promoted to sergeant for his bravery, became a national celebrity after the war.
Amazing. And the pigeon, Cher Ami.
Perhaps the most famous animal hero of the war. Cher Ami was a carrier pigeon used by the U.S. Army Signal Corps. During the Meuse-Argonne, a large group of American soldiers, part of the 77th Division, became trapped and surrounded by Germans, the famous Lost Battalion.
Cut off completely.
For 6 days, taking heavy casualties, running out of food and water, and worse, they were being accidentally shelled by their own Allied artillery, who didn't know their precise location. They dispatched several pigeons with messages, but they were shot down.
So Cher Ami was the last hope.
Cher Ami carried the crucial message giving their coordinates. The Germans saw the pigeon take off and opened fire. Cher Ami was hit, severely wounded, lost an eye, shot through the breastbone, leg hanging by a tendon, but somehow kept flying the 25 miles back to headquarters.
Delivered the message.
Delivered the message. The artillery fire was stopped, and a relief force eventually broke through, saving the 194 survivors of the Lost Battalion. Cher Ami became a national hero, received medals, and his taxidermied body is actually in the Smithsonian today. An incredible story of animal courage. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, while the Americans were fighting in the Meuse-Argonne, Germany's allies were collapsing, one by one.
Who surrendered first?
Bulgaria at the end of September, then the Ottoman Empire in October, then Austria-Hungary in early November. Germany stood alone, facing invasion, its army shattered, and its population starving and threatening revolution at home.
Similar to Russia. Fear of communist revolution.
A major fear. Sailors were mutinying, workers were striking. The German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, abdicated and fled the country on November 9th. A new German republic was declared, and they immediately sued for peace. The armistice negotiations accelerated rapidly.
Leading to that famous timing.
Signed in a railway car in the forest of Compiègne in France on November 11, 1918. Taking effect at 11:00 a.m. Paris time, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
But fighting continued right up to the last minute.
Tragically, yes. Orders were already issued for attacks that morning, and many commanders insisted on carrying them out. History records that nearly 11,000 casualties killed, wounded, or missing occurred on the war's final day.
11,000 on the last day. That's sickening.
Including an American soldier named Henry Gunther. He was apparently killed charging a German machine gun post at 10:59 a.m., just 60 seconds before the ceasefire took effect, believed to be the last soldier killed in the entire war. A final, pointless tragedy.
So the guns fall silent, then comes the peace conference.
Negotiations for the peace treaties began in Paris at the Palace of Versailles in January 1919. It was dominated by the leaders of the main Allied powers, the Big Three, or sometimes Big Four.
Wilson for the U.S.
Woodrow Wilson for the U.S., David Lloyd George for Great Britain, Georges Clemenceau for France, and Vittorio Orlando for Italy, though Italy felt sidelined pretty quickly. 5 separate treaties were eventually negotiated with the defeated Central Powers, but the main focus, the most consequential one, was the Treaty of Versailles with Germany.
And Wilson arrived with his big vision, the 14 points.
He did. He came with this idealistic plan for a new world order, based on principles like open diplomacy, no more secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, reduced armaments, self-determination for ethnic groups.
And most critically, the League of Nations.
Point 14. The creation of a global general association of nations to provide mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity for all states, great and small, designed to prevent future wars through collective security and dialogue.
But his allies in Europe, they had different priorities.
Very different priorities, particularly Clemenceau of France. France had suffered unimaginable devastation. 2 million French dead, huge areas of the country destroyed. Their priority was simple: punishment for Germany and security for France, revenge and ensuring Germany could never invade again.
So they pushed for harsh terms.
They insisted on crippling terms, forcing Germany to accept the infamous Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, taking sole blame for the war, demanding enormous reparations payments, billions of dollars to pay for Allied war costs and damages, severely restricting the size of Germany's army and navy, stripping Germany of all its overseas colonies and significant territory in Europe, like Alsace-Lorraine back to France.
Did Wilson manage to get the League of Nations included?
He did. That was his main achievement at Versailles. The Covenant of the League of Nations was written directly into the treaty, but the final treaty overall, it was a massive disappointment to many around the world, including Wilson himself in many ways.
Why? How did it fail?
It bore little resemblance to the idealism of the 14 points. Self-determination was applied unevenly, often favoring the Allies' interests. Italy and Japan left the conference feeling cheated out of territory they'd been promised, which fueled resentment and future militarism in those nations. The newly created states in Eastern Europe inherited complex ethnic tensions that would cause problems later.
And the impact on Germany.
Most critically, the harsh imposed terms fueled deep, lasting bitterness and economic hardship in Germany. It created fertile ground for extremist movements. Nationalists, including the rising Nazi Party led by Adolf Hitler, exploited this anger. They spread the toxic stabbed-in-the-back myth, the idea that the heroic German army hadn't really been defeated on the battlefield but was betrayed by weak politicians, socialists, and Jews at home who signed the humiliating treaty.
So Versailles planted the seeds for World War II.
Directly. Many historians argue that the failures and resentments created by the Treaty of Versailles made another major conflict almost inevitable within a generation.
And back home, the U.S. reaction to the treaty. Wilson faced a fight, didn't he?
A major fight. When Wilson brought the Treaty of Versailles back to the U.S. for ratification, he faced strong opposition in the Senate, particularly from Republicans led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge.
Was their main objection the harshness towards Germany?
Not primarily. Their main fear wasn't the treaty itself, but Article X of the League of Nations Covenant. This article seemed to commit member nations to collective military action to defend each other's borders. Lodge and others argued this undermined the U.S. Constitution, specifically Congress's sole power to declare war. They feared the League would drag the U.S. into future European conflicts against its will.
So they wanted changes. Amendments.
They proposed a series of amendments, or reservations, that would clarify America's obligations under the League, essentially preserving Congress's war-making power.
How did Wilson react?
Badly. He was exhausted from the grueling negotiations in Paris, physically weakened, and absolutely convinced that the League had to be accepted exactly as written, without reservations, to be effective. He saw Lodge's objections as purely partisan attempts to undermine his achievement.
So he refused to compromise.
He refused any compromise. He decided to take his case directly to the American people, embarking on this grueling nationwide speaking tour by train to rally public support for the treaty and the League.
And that's when he collapsed.
Yes. In September 1919, during the tour, Wilson suffered a major, debilitating stroke. He was rushed back to the White House, partially paralyzed and essentially incapacitated for months. His wife, Edith Wilson, fiercely guarded access to him and managed communications, effectively running the executive branch for a time.
And from his sickbed, he still wouldn't compromise.
Still refused to accept the Senate's reservations. He told his Democratic supporters to vote against the treaty with reservations. As a result, the treaty failed to get the necessary two-thirds majority in the Senate, both with and without reservations.
So the U.S. never ratified the Treaty of Versailles.
Never. And therefore never joined the League of Nations, the very international body its own president had championed.
What happened instead?
The U.S. eventually signed separate peace treaties with Germany, Austria, and Hungary in 1921, formally ending the state of war. And the election of 1920 brought Warren G. Harding to the presidency, promising a return to normalcy. This cemented America's retreat into isolationism for the next 2 decades, profoundly weakening the League of Nations from the start by depriving it of the world's new leading economic power.
A tragic outcome for Wilson's vision.
A deeply ironic and tragic outcome. And we absolutely must not forget the ultimate human cost, which went far beyond the battlefield casualties.
Right. We mentioned the military deaths. Over 8.5 million soldiers killed worldwide.
But conservative estimates put civilian deaths directly due to the war, from starvation, disease, massacres, bombardment, at around 7 million worldwide. An immense toll on non-combatants.
And then, on top of all that devastation, came the pandemic.
The 1918-1919 global influenza pandemic, often called the Spanish flu, though it didn't originate in Spain, this added a final, terrible layer of misery to the war years.
And the sources suggest a harrowing connection to the U.S. war effort.
Yes. While its exact origins are still debated, one of the most prominent theories, supported by strong evidence, is that this particularly virulent strain of influenza incubated in U.S. Army training camps, perhaps Fort Riley in Kansas, in the spring of 1918.
And spread with the troop deployments.
Exactly. The rapid, crowded movement of millions of young, susceptible soldiers across the country and then across the Atlantic to Europe provided the perfect vector for this highly contagious virus to spread globally with unprecedented speed.
And it was unusually deadly.
Incredibly deadly. Unlike typical flu strains that affect the very young and very old most severely, this pandemic disproportionately killed young, healthy adults, the very age group filling the armies. It caused massive disruption worldwide, killing somewhere between 20 million and possibly up to 100 million people globally, far more than the war itself.
So a massive non-military devastation directly linked to the military mobilization, bringing the war era to this incredibly grim, devastating close.
A tragic epilogue to the war to end all wars.
So pulling all this together, what does this all mean for the United States? What's the lasting legacy?
Well, globally, WWI irrevocably changed the world stage. It marked the definitive end of the old European order. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires all collapsed. It set in motion the eventual decline of the vast British and French colonial empires as well. And it cemented the rise of the United States as the undisputed economic and financial leader of the world. America went from being a debtor nation to the world's primary creditor.
And at home, how did it fundamentally change American society?
Forever. As we discussed, the role and size of the federal government expanded significantly, setting powerful precedents for economic regulation, social intervention, managing labor, things that became hallmarks of the 20th century.
And the assimilation effect.
The assimilation of millions of immigrants was definitely accelerated. That shared experience of military service, the citizen factory training camps, created a more unified, albeit complex, national identity forged through shared sacrifice.
And for minority groups, African Americans, women,
they used their wartime service and contributions as undeniable proof of their citizenship, their capability, their patriotism. It allowed them to stake powerful claims to greater rights and equality in the post-war era. It didn't bring immediate equality, far from it, but it was a crucial catalyst for the long civil rights movement and the final push for women's suffrage. Milestones like the 19th Amendment are directly linked to this wartime experience.
That legacy continues today, too, in how we remember veterans, right?
Absolutely. November 11th, originally Armistice Day, celebrating the end of WWI, was renamed Veterans Day after World War II to honor all veterans who served the nation in any conflict.
And veteran organizations grew.
New organizations like the American Legion were formed specifically by WWI veterans in 1919. Existing groups like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, expanded dramatically to support the massive influx of returning soldiers needing camaraderie, medical care, and advocacy. Groups like the Gold Star Mothers also formed, providing support for families who lost loved ones.
And we have that enduring symbol, the poppy.
The red poppy, inspired by the haunting poem In Flanders Fields, written by a Canadian doctor, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, after seeing poppies bloom on the battle-scarred fields of Belgium.
But an American woman helped make it the symbol of remembrance.
Yes, an American professor named Moina Michael read the poem and was inspired. She campaigned tirelessly to adopt the poppy as the official symbol of remembrance for war dead. It caught on, first in the U.S. and then across the British Commonwealth. Selling artificial poppies became a way to raise funds for disabled veterans. It's a powerful visual link, ensuring that the blood-soaked trenches of the Western Front and the sacrifices made there are not completely forgotten.
A lasting connection.
Ultimately, you look back. And while the Treaty of Versailles clearly failed to deliver Wilson's idealistic vision of lasting peace and international cooperation, and yes, it absolutely planted the seeds for future conflict. That League of Nations idea.
Even though the U.S. didn't join.
Even neutered by the lack of U.S. membership, the very creation of the League laid the essential groundwork. It was the first real attempt at a permanent global body dedicated to collective security. It provided a template, lessons learned, both positive and negative, for the future international organizations like the United Nations that would emerge after the next Great War.
So maybe a flawed first draft?
Perhaps a flawed but necessary first draft.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the U.S. had managed to overcome that internal political division, if Wilson and Lodge had found a compromise, if America had fully committed to that global framework in the 1920s,
Yeah.
how differently might the rise of fascism, the aggression of the 1930s, the whole path of World War II, how differently might that have unfolded?
It's one of history's great what-ifs, isn't it?
A question of leadership, global responsibility, and maybe missed opportunities that we inherited directly from this often forgotten war. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.